Hello, this is Justin Williams with the Wolfpacker Podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by co-host Matt Carter, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming ACC Football Kickoff. It actually started today. We're recording this Wednesday, July 21st. It started today with the teams from the Coastal Division. Tomorrow, Thursday, July 22nd, teams from the Atlantic Division, including NC State, will have their availability in Charlotte, North Carolina at the Westin downtown for ACC Football Kickoff. Matt and I will be in attendance for the Wolfpacker. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. For our listeners at home, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, Google Play, everywhere you listen to podcasts. Plus, you can always watch us on our YouTube channel, where you should subscribe to the channel, and please give this video a thumbs up. One more reminder, use that promo code PACK60 for a free 60-day trial at thewolfpacker.com. Unlocks all the premium recruiting information, the premium stories we've got going on there. Obviously, a lot more football content to come as the season is set to begin in early September. But we're now entering the unofficial start to football season, which is the media operations for all of the major conferences. I know the SEC is going on as well. All the major conferences are going to have theirs either this week, next week, or I've already had theirs last week. So, Matt, let's talk about the ACC Football Kickoff and as it relates specifically to NC State. You and I both submitted our preseason awards ballots for the All-ACC team and the projected order of finish. We'll get to that. We have our ballots live at thewolfpacker.com for those of you listening that are interested in seeing our picks. But let's start off with the focus on NC State. What's the one storyline you're most interested to find out more about once you get to Charlotte and you get to interview head coach Dave Doran or any of the three players that are going to be available in quarterback Devin Leary, center Grant Gibson, and linebacker Peyton Wilson?
For me, it's easy. It's the vaccination rate of the football team. 85% is the threshold to kind of operate under normal operations in the football building and locker rooms and et cetera, where you can just resume your normal team meetings and pregame preparations and the whole 9 yards. And, not to beat the dead horse or bring back bad memories, but we saw what a logistical and competitive advantage it is to be vaccinated when the NC State baseball team essentially got College World Series. So, new ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips, I think, said more than half of the ACC teams have met the 85% threshold. There are 7 teams that the universities are mandating vaccines on campus. I would assume, but David Teal, who you know well, Justin, one of the great guys in the ACC, listed the 7 schools, and one of those was Notre Dame. So I don't know how they are. Is he counting that towards the 14 or not, or towards the ACC team? But if he is, then you're saying, he's at over half. So if you're counting Notre Dame, that's 15 teams. That means probably 8 overall teams have met the 85% threshold.
Well,
if
Matt,
we're not
apparently the Notre Dame's logo is on the ACC Football Kickoff program once we get there. Spoiler alert for you. Once we get to Charlotte tomorrow, Luke DeCock actually asked new ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips a question about it. But interesting. ACC clearly wants Notre Dame. There's no secrets about that. We'll see. I know that's one of the main themes with the commissioner-type availabilities going on today. But anyways, continue, Matt. I agree with you. Vaccination is the main storyline that I'm interested to hear about NC State. But go on with what you're saying.
Yeah, I was going to say, so even if you don't count Notre Dame, you're probably saying 8 teams vaccinated, because if you don't count Notre Dame, that's 14 teams, right? Over half would be at least 8. 7 would be exactly it. So somewhere around 6 to 7, somewhere around 7 to 8 of what I would call the football version of the ACC, which does not include Notre Dame, have met the 85% threshold. So I'm just curious where NC State is in that, and how close are they if Dave Doran willing to share details. I know Mac Brown said UNC was not there, but they're close. I don't know if any other coaches in the ACC have said anything. So that's what I'm kind of. It's just such an advantage. I mean, I had the politics of choice to have the vaccine or not. All of that setting aside, I'm just looking at it strictly from a logistical and competitive standpoint. There's a huge advantage to meeting the threshold of 85%, and your ability to get your entire season off without hiccups on your end increase immensely by many times fold if you meet that threshold. So to me, that's the one storyline I'm looking for, and then the kind of off of that, are there any kind of roster updates? Guys who may be injured or not ready for the start of fall camp, or sometimes you might hear about a guy or two no longer on the team at the end of the summer as we get summer. I think summer session 2 is ended by now, or getting really close to being ended. So those are some of the other things that I'll be looking to.
Yeah, I mean, of course there will be some details panned out in the next day here. I'm more interested in kind of the off the field stuff at this football preview, because a lot of the on the field stuff, we wrote the football preview for the Wolfpacker magazine, which is currently in print and should be in mailboxes of Wolfpack Club members here shortly this month. But we've already spoken to Dave Doran, we've spoken to Peyton Wilson, and I interviewed Devin Leary for a story. So from the football on the field narratives, I think we kind of have a grasp of what NC State is looking at heading into the 2021 season. But it will be interesting to get finally some in-person availability. This is our first in-person availability with head coach Dave Doran or any NC State players since the beginning of the pandemic. That will be, I think, a refreshing experience to get some answers face-to-face and have and likewise on their end, to have questions in person rather than through a laptop screen on Zoom. But the other big topic in college sports is name, image, and likeness, and I'm interested to hear Dave Doran's thoughts on the evolving nature of college athletics with this new NCAA allowance of name, image, and likeness. I'm interested to hear if there are any players on NC State that have accepted any deals beyond the I saw Thayer Thomas, I think maybe Drake Thomas as well, Barstool Sports athletes. I don't really know if that entails any type of compensation rather than just an affiliation type of deal. But I would be interested to hear if there are any, legitimate name, image, likeness deals, and I'm interested to hear what the athletes have to say about it as well. What the conversations are like in the locker rooms, what they think of it, and what their plans may be for this summer and heading into the fall. But no, I'm with you. I think the main storyline is the vaccination piece. Where everything is at in terms of the numbers of these rosters who have been vaccinated. We don't have any specific inside information in terms of what NC State's vaccination rate may be. We might find that out tomorrow. If I had a hunch, I would imagine that it's probably good compared to the rest of the conference, just considering how thorough NC State's protocols were as a football program last season. They were one of very few teams in the country to play the entirety of its schedule last season. So there was clearly buy-in in the locker room in terms of COVID protocol and staying safe and staying away from the virus last season. We'll see if that translates into this offseason, now that there's vaccines widely available for every party involved. But Matt, let's transition a little bit to the ACC or the preseason ACC awards. I know we voted on the All-ACC team. We voted on projected order of finish. I believe the voting for those polls, if you will, ends Friday at noon. So I don't know if they'll be released shortly thereafter or if it'll go into the
probably week. More next week, early next week would be my guess.
Maybe next week. I'm sure. There are a few, votes that I think we all have a pretty good idea who's going to win those. But let's talk a little bit about, our ballots. We can start with the All-ACC teams. We, again, have all of our, ballot information on the Wolfpacker.com if you're interested to see the entirety of the teams that we voted on. On offense, there wasn't much disagreement in terms of NC State players that we voted on. We both had 4 on each of our All-ACC offensive side of the ball teams. Both had Zonovan Knight at running back. Both had Thayer Thomas as an all-purpose back. Both had Ikem Ekwonu as an offensive tackle, and then both had Grant Gibson at center. Of those 4, who would you be the most confident will make the final team, and who would you say you might be a little bit worried will end up making the final results, since, of course, we might have a little bit of favoritism being on the NC State beat. We know these athletes well. We're probably, more familiar and confident in their abilities than, let's say, a beat writer of Boston College. And, of course, the same can be said about those beats and their respective players. So, Matt, who are you most confident in, and who would you be worried about making the final result?
I think Ikem Ekwonu and Bam Knight are pretty safe bets. Bam probably first, and then Icky second. Grant Gibson certainly has the credentials for it. When I got into the voting and did the research, full disclosure, there are a couple of other centers in the ACC. The kid at Boston College comes to mind, Lindstrom, I believe is his name, and there was another center in the ACC that was pretty well regarded and kind of graded out well and did well at the offensive line metrics that are kind of out there. So, Grant Gibson, not saying that he shouldn't be first team All-ACC. He's just one of a few that should be. So I would be curious to see how that plays out. Thayer Thomas, that's kind of a unique position at quote-unquote all-purpose back, which was created to find a way to get Jalen Samuels on the All-ACC team by the ACC. Literally, that's why it was created. I think Thayer has a good case for it. He returns punts, he'll throw touchdown passes on trick plays, and obviously he's a good receiver. So, but, there might be several candidates on that one. So, if I had to rank them, I would say Bam, Icky, and then a bit of a drop-off, Grant and Thayer, on my confidence meter of them making first-team All-ACC.
I agree with you. I would agree with those rankings exactly. I think there's no doubt that Bam Knight will be the running back on the team. Ikem Ekwonu seems to be a favorite around the league. I know The Athletic has written a story about him earlier this summer, calling him the most feared offensive lineman in the ACC. So there's been some offseason buzz for Icky. I think those are 2 I would consider them locks. Thayer Thomas, if you look at versatility as the metric, he should be the guy considering how much he's able to do. It's unfortunate we weren't able to vote on a punt returner. I think if we were able to vote on a punt returner, Thayer Thomas would have a pretty darn good shot of winning that preseason accolade. But the all-purpose back one was kind of weird because it was almost kind of a way for, maybe a third best running back in the league to maybe get a spot on the preseason team. It wasn't – Thayer was the only guy that's throwing touchdown passes, returning punts, and catching out routes, from the slot. So, but he's probably the only guy in the ACC that can do all 3 of those things too. So let's move on to the defense, where we had a little bit more disagreement. I had a few more, I think, than you did. Maybe that's just my rookie voting favoritism being shown there. I had Daniel Joseph as one of my defensive end picks on the first team. Peyton Wilson and Isaiah Moore, both linebacker picks on the All-ACC team. And I also had Trenton Gill as the punter. You just had Peyton Wilson and Isaiah Moore, so I guess we can start maybe why. I can tell you why I picked Daniel Joseph and Trenton Gill, but why didn't you pick those 2 guys on your All-ACC ballot? This is a Wolfpack podcast after all, so you're the one that has to defend not picking those guys.
Yeah, and listen, they both have great cases, right? Remind me again who I know I picked the young man from Virginia Tech. Who was the other that I picked for defensive end?
Defensive end, we both had Miles Murphy from Clemson as one of our defensive ends, and then
Yeah,
you picked Amari Barno of Virginia Tech, who, again, is an athletic stud.
yeah, and he had just as many sacks, I believe, last year as Daniel Joseph, or right around the same number. And I think his TFLs were maybe, I forget, metric-wise, I just thought that he graded out slightly better than Daniel Joseph. But Daniel Joseph had a strong case for it. That's not a knock on Daniel Joseph. It's just kind of a tip your hat. In fact, actually, Daniel Joseph probably had a stronger case than Miles Murphy from Clemson. That's just, I'm not a guy that's big on projection, quote unquote, breakouts. I know some guys, for instance, have been having Josh Downs from UNC as an All-ACC receiver, and based on what? He caught like 10 passes or something, or maybe more than that. But I don't, he was not one of their main 4 or 5 receivers last year. That's a leap of faith. And so I'm not a guy that takes those leap of faith. I do the same thing in basketball voting. I'm very hesitant to put freshmen up there. Particularly in the old days. Now you really have no choice. But so that's why he was just I think he was probably third on my list. Trenton Gill, the punter, I picked the punter from Miami, if I'm right? Headley.
I just went to another tab, but yes, that's correct. Lou Headley from Miami was your pick at punter.
Yeah, and partially influenced by the metrics that David Hale from ESPN, my good buddy, put on Twitter. And when I looked at the metrics and the hang time and the net yardage and the average yards per return and the average of punting, he seemed to be clearly the best of the group. But again, that's not a knock on Trenton Gill. He obviously was very much under consideration. Just based on last year's numbers, I felt like the young man from Miami had a slight edge there.
Fair enough, Matt. I mean, You're lucky none of those guys are going to be at the ACC media kickoff tomorrow, because I would have maybe had to mention something, but you might be more worried about dealing with Daniel Joseph than maybe Trenton Gill. I'm no knock on Trenton Gill, but I'm just saying, like, from a physicality standpoint, Daniel Joseph, defensive end.
I've got about 40 pounds on Trenton.
Right, and you probably only got about 3 seconds to get away before he's going to catch you in stride, because that's what he does. He gets in the backfield and he sacks the quarterback, which is why I included him on the All-ACC team. He is tied for the league's top returning sacks leader, if you will, with Matt's pick, Virginia Tech's guy, Amari Barno, at defensive end. So, I picked the other leader. Just so happens he's the guy at NC State. We'll see how it all unfolds. I think there's also an element to how good a team is going to be. I have my doubts about Virginia Tech, and I think NC State's going to be among the best teams in the ACC. And then with Trenton Gill, I mean, I just look at that story that he has. He came in his first year in 2019 after being a former walk-on, earns a scholarship in the spring of that season, earns the starting job at that, and then leads the league in punting average and was third in the FBS in punting average that season. Probably a snub for the All-ACC team in 2019. I think he made third team, but I don't know how you lead the league and you're third in punting average in the country and you're not the first team punter. Nonetheless, he goes on to finish third last season, and I don't think he was on any of the All-ACC teams. So more respect for Trenton Gill, although Wolfpack fans are hoping Trenton Gill won't have too many reps this season. They're hoping you never have to call out the punter with how strong the offense could be. So let's move on to projected order of finish to wrap up this podcast. Matt, we can mention the Coastal Division because I know sometimes NC State fans are equally as interested to know what people think about North Carolina as they are about NC State. But this is an NC State podcast, so let's focus on the Atlantic Division, where we did have a disagreement about where NC State will finish in the final ACC Atlantic Division standings. So I have NC State. We both have Clemson in first. I think everyone that's voting will have Clemson in first place in the ACC Atlantic Division, and probably 90 to 95% will have Clemson as the eventual champion of the ACC. But then after that, is where the disagreement sets in. I have NC State at number 2, Boston College number 3, and Matt has Boston College number 2, NC State number 3. Matt, I already know the defense you're going to have, but I'll give you your pedestal to defend.
Give me the mic.
And if you guys remember, he's the primary operator of the Wolfpacker account. So if you want to find him on Twitter, maybe send him a DM. Matt's going to be the one reading them, and you can share your thoughts about his third place pick for NC State in the ACC Atlantic Division. But go ahead, Matt. Let's hear it out. Why NC State behind Boston College?
Well, let me be clear first off. I think NC State is just as good, if not better, than Boston College. But when I do these picks, I'm doing a projected of how I see them finishing in the ACC. Not how I, there've been plenty of the team that won the Coastal, we all know, wasn't the best team in the Coastal. So my spiel on this is simple. I think NC State I have Miami and UNC 1-2 in the Coastal. Well, who is NC State's 2 Coastal crossovers? Miami and UNC. They're the only team playing Miami and UNC. And I guarantee you, if there were 100 sports writers at ACC Kickoff, probably 98 of them, if not 99, if not 100, are going to have Miami, UNC 1-2 in the Coastal. So they obviously being in the Atlantic, they play Clemson. They're going to be the only team in the ACC that in the Atlantic, at least, they're going to be playing Clemson, Miami, and UNC. I forgot Boston College's off the top of my head. I know Virginia Tech, I think, was one, and I forget who the other was. Obviously, they have not that under the schedule. And look, to be fair, Boston College had the toughest ACC schedule last year by far of anybody. Played Notre Dame, played North Carolina, played Clemson, and I think they went 6-4, maybe. I forget.
I can double check.
So this is mainly me thinking the 2 teams very close. You look at Boston College, great quarterback, great offensive line, maybe the ACC best receiver in Jay Flowers. A lot coming back, just like NC State. I think NC State probably has a little bit more All-ACC talent on its team, but there's a lot of momentum in Boston College, and I just think that their schedule may allow them to sneak ahead of NC State, even if NC State might be slightly better. Remember, NC State has to go to Boston College too, so that adds to the degree of difficulty of the schedule of, you look at the teams that NC State plays on the road in the Atlantic, you're probably talking about the 3 teams that would be most competing with you for that second spot: Boston College, Wake Forest, and maybe Florida State. So that is strictly a byproduct of the schedule. That's it. If I were to rank them on how I thought it was, I would have NC State second. I put a slight change because of the schedule.
All right. So you didn't power rank them. You projected the final standing, so we can appreciate that. Now, by the way, Boston College 6-5 overall last season, 5-5 in the ACC. NC State, on the other hand, was 7-3 in the ACC, 8-3 in the regular season. Of course, NC State did have an easier ACC schedule. We can admit that. But, Matt, are you saying that Boston College is going to have a better ACC record than NC State, or do you see it being a tiebreaker situation where maybe Boston College has a better overall record?
No, I see it as one team. Boston. I could even see them both being like a 5-3 in the ACC, but BC wins at home and does have the tiebreaker, or somewhere BC 5-3 and NC State's 4-4.
Right.
But that's only because NC State had to play, arguably, I would suggest outside of itself, the top 5 teams in the ACC are Miami, UNC, Clemson, NC State, and Boston College. Well, NC State probably the only team that has to play all 4 of the other top 5 teams in the ACC. So if I would do a power ranking, that's my top 5 in the power rankings. And
okay.
NC State got to play 4 of the top 5, and 2 of those on road. in Boston College and Miami. And the number one team, you got to play at home. So that's a tough ACC slate. I mean, it's just a tough. No, I say that on paper and watch Boston College completely blow up and Miami be a fluke and UNC can't replace all those guys, and it turns out the good teams were like Virginia and Pittsburgh or something like that, right? But on paper, that's how it looks to me in July.
Okay, fair enough. We'll let the listeners decide. Who has the better reasoning here. And I'm with you, Matt. I understand the scheduling angle. I just think that this is a special year for NC State. And, frankly, if you wanted to be bold, I mean, maybe even I would love to see all of the final results. I want to see if anybody in the league that's voted on this picked NC State to win the Atlantic possibly. It's a tough stretch. I think NC State's in a position where this could be the year where the Wolfpack beats Clemson in Carter Finley Stadium. I don't know if that equates to winning the Atlantic Division, because then from there I'd probably presume that Clemson's not going to drop another ACC game if they drop one early to NC State, which would mean you have to go at least 7-1 in league play. And it's a tough schedule. There's you'd still have to go on and beat Miami and Carolina and Boston College on the road. So I still think NC State's, going to be competing for that second spot in the ACC Atlantic. This may be a year where Clemson is gettable. I think if there is a year that Clemson is gettable, it's right now when, Trevor Lawrence is out the door. They've got the young quarterback in DJ Uiagalelei. Did you like my pronunciation there, Matt? Maybe we'll
I'm going to take your word for it.
We'll get you right by the time Week 4 rolls around for NC State Clemson. You're going to be pronouncing it perfectly. DJ Uiagalelei.
No, I'm going to stick with DJ.
DJ Uiagalelei. And, he
won't be on trend, isn't he?
He seems like a good – apparently he's huge. I mean, he's like 6'5", 250. I mean, you might see him tomorrow. So we'll see firsthand.
So you're going to miss him.
I'm sure. Apparently there are some Clemson beat writers that are thinking the ACC is going to – the ACC media beat is going to change its mind on DJ when they see him firsthand. They're going to realize what kind of physical specimen this guy is. But anyways, it might be the year where Clemson could be vulnerable. Maybe not in the Atlantic Division, but maybe down the road playing a Miami or a Carolina in the ACC championship. They do seem like it's a vulnerable year for Clemson.
I will say this: I was surprised at how little Clemson I was putting on my All-ACC team.
Almost nobody on offense. I mean, Justin Ross is really the only guy.
Yeah. For a team that I had zero hesitation to pick win in the conference, I was surprised at how little representation I had of Clemson on the All-ACC team.
Well, I still think NC State is I think we both agree NC State's a better team on paper than Boston College. And, Boston College just seems like the type of team that could be the preseason media darling just because they had a great first year under head coach Jeff Hafley, and then who knows what they get next this upcoming season in year 2 under Hafley. Phil Jerkovich, or however you're supposed to pronounce his last name, I don't know if the J might be silent, but Jerkovich, you know who I'm talking about. He is a great quarterback. He looks like a future pro, so you're in good hands with that. And I'd say Wake Forest is a team to look out for in the ACC Atlantic. I was tempted to put them at 3 right behind NC State instead of Boston College. I put Wake Forest 4, Florida State 5. We both agreed on
another team NC State has to play on the road. Wake Forest.
And Florida State. And Florida State. State gets Louisville and Syracuse at home. See, those are our teams that we have 6 and 7 in the Atlantic. They get Clemson at home, but they get Boston College, Wake Forest, and Florida State. Pretty much the only 3 other teams. I mean, maybe Louisville will surprise some people. I saw David Hale had Louisville at 2 in his projected order of finish, which I'm kind of thinking, what does he see that we're not seeing?
I think there's a feeling that Louisville was the very unlucky team last year, like NC State was the unlucky team in 2019. So
right.
I agree with you, though, on Wake Forest. I've always been a Dave Clawson appreciator. I think he's a great coach, and they do return a sneaky amount of talent at Wake Forest. So I agree with you. That was their team to me. They were their clear pecking order of top 4 in the Atlantic, and then the next three. I didn't really consider Florida State that close yet. I think that's too far of a jump for them to get up there. Louisville kind of the wild card. Who's the real Cardinals? The Scott Satterfield team of 2019 or the Scott Satterfield team of 2020?
Well, it's interesting because every year we go into the college football season and we look at the Coastal and say that's the division that's going to have all the parity. There's a clear pecking order in the Atlantic Division. It seems to be the case every single season. But you might find out this fall that the reverse may be true, that the parity might be in the Atlantic Division because there are several good teams in there. And then when you've got the perennial power in that division, Clemson, potentially being vulnerable. Now we say this and they're likely going to be the preseason ranked number 2 team in the country. Their defense is going to be very special, and they've got the best defensive coordinator in the country in Brent Venables. However, if they can't score more points than the opponent, they're not going to win every game like they have typically done in seasons past. So maybe, just maybe, the Atlantic could be the division of parity this year, because it does seem that it's a two-man race between Miami and North Carolina in the Coastal, and then the rest just seems to be kind of a hodgepodge. But let's wrap this podcast up because I've got to get on the road to Charlotte. Matt, I will see you there tomorrow morning on Thursday. And for our listeners at home, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, Google Play. Plus, you can watch us on our YouTube channel where you should subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up. Drop a comment while you're at it. And head over to the Wolfpacker.com, use promo code PACK60 for a free 60-day trial on all of our premium content, news, and analysis. We've got some great content coming for you off of our time at ACC Football Kickoff tomorrow, so stay tuned for that on the Wolfpacker.com. And for Matt Carter, this is Justin Williams, and this has been the Wolfpacker Podcast.